Thanks all for joining us tonight for our fourth webinar in the Misbehaviour or Misunderstood Season 2 series. My name's Nicola MacDonald and I'm the Animal Welfare Operations Officer at Companion Animals New Zealand. Tonight's webinar is about reading animal emotions, short talks by leading experts. And this webinar tonight applies to dogs, horses and cats. We have a packed session for you tonight, and this webinar is likely going to be about 75 minutes long. So it's a little bit longer than our previous ones. Last month, I had the pleasure of interviewing 3 international experts in animal emotions and welfare work, and we recorded their presentations. And to help guide our discussion and answer a few questions from a researcher's point of view this evening, I'm pleased to welcome Dr Gosia Zobel, who's joining us from Ethico NZ in Hamilton. So until recently, Gosia was part of the Companion Animals New Zealand research team, and she coordinated several collaborative studies, including one on cat expressions, which we'll hear about this evening as well. And with over 2 decades of research experience across multiple species, Gosia is particularly recognized for her work in goat welfare. So yeah, Gosia, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate the invitation.
Oh, it's great to see you. All right, so without further delay, we'll jump into our first presentation. Welcome, Dr. Holly. Real pleasure to have you with us today. Holly Molinaro is an animal welfare consultant with a strong background in animal behavior research. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology with a minor in psychology from Stetson University, where she began her journey studying the behavior of pygmy rattlesnakes. After working for Disney's Animal Kingdom, she completed a Master's of Science in Biology at Sonoma State University, focusing on the social behavior of Hamadryas baboons at Auckland Zoo. She went on to earn her PhD from Arizona State University, where she explored dog emotions and how humans perceive them. Her work has been widely featured, including in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Good Morning America. And today, Holly will be guiding us through the complex and fascinating world of dog emotions and how they're understood from a human psychological perspective. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Holly. We're excited to learn from all your insights.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. This is very exciting. All right, I will share my screen and we can get started. Okay. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about canine emotions, body language, and really how we as humans perceive this. So I always like to start with this infographic because I think this is how a lot of people tend to think about dog emotions, right? There are certain behaviors that equal certain emotions. And if we can just simply learn these body postures, then we can know exactly how the dog is feeling. But as my presentation is going to share, it's a lot more complicated than that, sadly. So before I get into dog emotions and animal emotions, I'm going to take a step back and talk about human emotions because we need kind of a background before we can delve into animal emotions. And you might think the question, what is an emotion, is a fairly simple question, but in fact, the answer depends on who you ask. So this is where it's going to get a little complicated. So in human theory of emotion, there are all these different theories of what constitutes an emotion. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm going to highlight 2 of them. So there's the basic and discrete theory of emotion, which I like to think of like the movie Inside Out, where you have little characters, little emotions inside your brain. They press a button, you feel an emotion. And then there's psychological construction. So basic and discrete theory basically says there are discrete core emotions within the brain. They are a neurobiological process, right? So there's something wired in the brain that contributes to these emotions. They're pre-wired, they're universal, so everyone has them, and they're evolutionarily based. So they arose for a specific purpose. So in this example, you'd see a snake, something would trigger in the brain, probably fear because there's an evolutionary purpose to be scared of an animal that might hurt you, and that would cascade throughout the body. However, there is something called the constructed theory of emotion. And this states that emotions are based off culture, preconceived concepts, situational context, and the social reality. So this means that emotions are not pre-wired and they're not universal. So everyone's going to have different emotions based on how they're feeling in the moment, what culture they grew up in, things like that. So we go back to our snake example. In this case, you're gonna have a different emotional experience than, say, the person next to you. So for example, me, I love snakes. If I saw a snake on a hike, I would be like, this is so exciting. I want to know what type of snake it is. But someone else next to you might be terrified of snakes and they would experience a different emotion. So you can see here how these two emotional theories, whichever one you prescribe to, is going to change what you believe an emotion to be. So it's really complicated, right? And so when we go to animal emotions and dog emotions, it makes this field even more so complicated. And speaking of, I have my cat trying to get my hair, so that's even more complicated. Okay, so I'm going to go briefly into animal emotion research and then dog emotion research, and then I will get into specifically my work with dog emotions. So from a basic and discrete theory of emotion, this is where most of animal emotion research comes from. And the idea here is that if there are brain regions associated with certain emotions, if humans have them, mammals have them, then they must have the same emotions that we do. So for example, the most classic one talked about is the amygdala, which usually has to do with fear and aggression. So if we have that and that is lit up when we experience fear and aggression, and then if an animal has that brain region that's lit up, the animal must also experience fear and aggression. Also, from the basic and discrete theory of emotion, it states that we can read animals' emotions based on facial expression. So certain muscle patterns will distinguish certain emotional states. Now, the constructed theory of emotion has not actually been studied in animals yet, but the idea here, if we're going to prescribe to this theory, is that animals inhabit habitats unlike anything that humans can ever comprehend. So for example, seals can dive hundreds and hundreds of meters underneath the ocean. Elephants can hear thousands or hundreds of miles away, right? So why would their emotions evolve to be exactly the same as humans? So if we dive into dogs specifically, those who study and prescribe to a basic theory of emotion say that dogs have the same core emotions as humans, but they must just be slightly different or less advanced. They might have some secondary emotions like guilt or jealousy. And fear and aggression is the most commonly studied emotion in dogs. And we know that cortisol, heart rate, and body temperature all increase in response to a threatening stimuli. Now, on the flip side, when it comes to constructed theory dog emotion research, there really isn't any so far. The constructed theory of emotion is really new in human literature, so we are not quite there yet in terms of dog emotion. But I'll just highlight this quick study. This study still fascinates me, even though it was done in 2013. The researchers here had no bias of basic and discrete or constructed theory, but basically they presented dogs with positive or negative stimuli, and then they recorded their tails. And they found that if they were presented with negative stimuli, so like seeing a cat was the example, their tail wagged more to the left. Where if they were shown positive stimuli, like seeing their owner, the tail wagged more to the right. So this is just a really interesting example of kind of taking a step back from using human emotion words, like trying to find happiness or sadness in dogs, and just starting from like a bottom-up approach and saying, hey, what happens if we give a dog something positive? What happens? And actually with this, taking the video and then slowing the video down and using all these angles, they actually found there was some difference. So this is some really promising research. So now going into human perception of dog emotions. So perception of dog emotions. So again, I want to reiterate, I'm going to talk about this throughout the rest of this talk, is that perception of dog emotions is completely different than the dog emotion itself. So just because we're perceiving something that has nothing to do, sadly, with what the dog is experiencing. And it's really important to make that distinction early, and as you'll see throughout the rest of this talk. So perception of dog emotions, we know depends on demographics. So we know women sometimes perceive dog emotions differently than men. We also know culture has an impact. We know, for example, a study came out showing cultures that aren't raised with dogs actually will have a harder time reading dog emotions than those cultures where dogs are a part of the household. So demographics play some factors. Dog experience as well. This one's a little tricky because some studies say that if you have more dog experience, you're actually better at perceiving dog emotions, whereas other studies say there actually is no difference. So a lot more research needs to go there. Where the focus is on the dog. This is interesting because we know that humans only tend to focus on the ears and the eyes of the dog when trying to perceive the emotion. So even if they say they're looking at the whole dog, when studies use eye tracking, they actually find that actually humans are only looking at the face. And on the flip side, interestingly, dogs look at the whole human body, which I just think is very interesting. And finally, anthropomorphism, which I'm sure a lot of the audience for this webinar knows this word, but basically prescribing human characteristics onto animals. And so perception of dog emotions heavily depends on our anthropomorphic biases, which I will also heavily talk about. So I'm going to talk specifically about context. So this paper, which recently came out, explored context. So the situation surrounding the dog. And this was a two-part study. So briefly, I'll talk about the first part, and then I'll dive into the second part of the study. So this was actually my own dog, dad, and my cat, Saffron, which was a very sweet thing that my family got to be a part of the study. So essentially, I was interested in context. How much does context matter? And so for this first part of the study, I filmed my dog and my dad doing positive and negative things. For example, negative seeing the cat. And I essentially edited out the background. So we showed people, as you can see here in the B image, just a dog on a black background. And then we showed them the full contextual information. And what we found was that seeing the context of a positive situation made the dog seem to feel better and be more calm, whereas seeing the context of a negative situation made the dog seem to feel worse and be more agitated. Even if the dog was doing exactly the same thing, suddenly when context was added back in, people's perception changed. So from that study, we obviously found that the situation, seeing it changes things. So I was really interested in what if the context was wrong? So if context is so important, what if it's wrong? So I went back, filmed my dad and dog in different scenarios. Again, some positive, some negative. So for example, seeing a vacuum would be considered negative. Seeing his leash would be considered positive. And I edited all these videos. We had 3 positive scenarios, 3 negative scenarios. So positive was seeing the leash, being praised, and getting a treat. And 3 negative was seeing the vacuum, being reprimanded, or seeing a tape measure, which was like a novel, scary object. So we had 18 final videos. So 6 of them were original content. So all I did was like put a black background so it looked the same as everything else. But then there was 12 other ones that I mixed up. So some of them were swapped content, which means I edited the video to make it seem like Oliver, maybe he was seeing a vacuum, but he was really getting yelled at. So it was still a negative situation, but I want to see maybe the video editing is going to mess everyone up. You know, maybe that's the end of the study. Video editing messes people up. But then I also did the mismatch. So where Oliver was seeing a vacuum, maybe he was really seeing a leash, right? So positive and negative swap. So I have some videos to show. So feel free to think in your mind what this dog might be feeling. So that's one. And then I will show you the next one. And again, feel free to think or write down what now you think the dog might be feeling. So if you couldn't tell, both of those videos, Oliver was doing the exact same thing. The only thing that was different was the context. And the actual context was Oliver seeing the leash. And so that first video was actually an edited video where he was not actually seeing the vacuum. So if you were like most of our participants in the study, your perception would have changed based on what you saw. So I'm going to go over some results from this study just to kind of give you a really big overview of what we saw. So we asked people valence rating. So how good or bad do you think the dog is feeling? And for these original videos, we can kind of use this as like a guide. So when people saw the dog in a happy situation, they rated the valence as almost a 7 out of 10. When they saw the dog in a sad situation, and again, these were not edited, so the dog was actually in a sad situation, they rated the valence as much lower. Now swapped. So again, these videos were edited, but the dog was still in a positive or negative situation. So the videos weren't mismatched. And again, we see the same pattern that when the dog appears to be in a positive situation, people rate the valence as high. When the dog appears to be in a negative situation, people rate the valence as lower. Now, where it gets fun and interesting is that when the dog was in a negative situation, but appeared to be in a positive situation, they rated the valence as high, and vice versa. When the dog was actually in a positive situation, but appeared to be in a negative situation, they rated the dog as much more sad. And I also, I measured a bunch of stuff with this study, but one thing I wanted to highlight for this webinar was I also coded free responses. So I asked people to freely describe what they thought the dog was feeling. And I had coders who were blind to the study question code the free responses for a bunch of stuff, and one being anthropomorphism. And as you can see, there was a lot of anthropomorphism in the answers. So people were, when they were asked to freely respond of what they thought the dog might be feeling, they use a lot of human-centric emotions, human-centric words. They describe the dogs as if they were little people experiencing those emotions. And that was highly prevalent across all videos. Interestingly, it was less in the negative videos. So overall, we found that seeing the context of a positive situation made the dog seem to have higher valence but lower arousal. Seeing the context of a negative situation made the dog seem to have lower valence but higher arousal, regardless of the dog itself. So the key takeaway here is that people were not looking at the dog. They are looking at everything around the dog to assume what the dog might be thinking. So that's something to keep in mind. So one of my other studies I looked at, yes, and high levels of anthropomorphism, which I just said, is about our mood. So if we go back and think about the constructed theory of emotion, it says that the situation is going to impact our emotions and how we perceive emotions, but also how we're feeling in the moment. So I was interested in, if we're in a happy mood, are you more likely to see a dog in a happy mood? Or if you're in a sad mood, are you more likely to see a dog in a sad mood? So this study was kind of the same idea of the other one, two-part experiment. It was an online survey with undergrads at my university. And what we did was we first had to get these groups of people into negative, neutral, or positive moods. So we basically showed them pictures that were already been validated to induce these moods. And then they watched 9 videos of dogs. So they watched 3 videos of Canyon, 3 videos of Henry, and 3 videos of Oliver. So the first part of the study, they saw human-centric images. So just basically not images of dogs or animals. And you can see an example here. This would be a negative image, a neutral image, and a positive image. And just for sake of time, we basically asked them how they were feeling after they saw these images. And we did have 3 different groups of people in 3 different moods. But when we asked them to rate the dog emotions, there was no effect, which was kind of interesting. So we thought, okay, maybe if you're in a happy mood or sad mood, it doesn't really matter. But we want to go a little bit further because all of these images were about people. But what about if they're about dogs? So I did a second study and I used images of only dogs to prime people. So I had, sadly, 7 very sad images of dogs, as you can see, 7 neutral images of dogs, and then 7 absolutely adorable images of dogs. And again, we asked people after they saw these images how they were feeling, and we had 3 different groups. We had one group that was in a very bad mood after they saw those negative images of dogs. We had one group that was in a very good mood after they saw a bunch of puppies and teacups. And then we had a group that was about in the middle. And this time we asked, they saw those same videos, how good or bad you think the dog is feeling. And this time, interestingly, we found there was an effect, but not in the way we expected. So we can see here, those who were in the negative group actually rated the dogs as more happy. Those in the positive group, who just saw those cute little puppies in teacups, actually rated all the dogs as less happy. So if you're in a happy mood, you're more likely to see dogs in a negative, more negatively. And if you're in a negative mood, you actually are more likely to see dogs in a more positive light. And so we found here broadly dog-specific mood induction alters emotional perception. So it could be that people just saw this adorable puppy in a teacup, and then they just saw a dog on a black background and were like, oh, well, actually the dog's not as happy as I thought. Vice versa. Some people might have just seen dogs in terrible conditions and then just see a dog on a black background and think, oh, this dog is much happier than I just saw that past dog. But the idea here, the key to take away is our past experiences and our mood is going to shape how we perceive dog emotion. So it might not even be something you're fully aware of or conscious of, but if you just saw a really sad dog, say you're walking your dog down the street, you just saw a really sad dog, and you walk a little further and you see a dog just walking along doing its thing, what you just saw or what your mood is going to impact how you perceive the next dog you see. So that's something also to just keep in mind. So, what do we know about dog emotions? Well, they most likely evolved for some specific function, right? We kind of know this from that basic and discrete theory of emotion. Emotions evolve for some specific function. However, we are not dogs, so we can't be sure what those exact emotions are. Dogs might have some unique emotional capacities that we as humans cannot even comprehend because we are not dogs. I like to think that dogs might have some type of extra happiness emotion that we as humans can't really comprehend. And it's not like our happiness, and that's okay. And that's great that it's not like our happiness. And just knowing that dogs might have different emotions than we as humans do. We also can't be sure how similar or not they are to our own. And again, that's okay. And I think that's kind of the beauty of studying dog emotions and animal emotions is getting to figure out what they might be experiencing, as opposed to just trying to copy and paste what we might be feeling onto a dog. Again, as I'm highlighting throughout this talk, human perception of dog emotion does not equal dog emotion. And future research needs to focus on emotion from a dog's point of view. So trying to figure out what specific emotional capacities a dog might have, maybe even possibly coming up with new names and new terms for dog-specific emotions, and then studying those. So a lot of times I talk about this and people say, okay, but I know my own dog, so like, who cares if I'm wrong? And to that I say, yeah, your own dog, great. My cat sitting here, I'm sure I'm wrong about her emotional capabilities, but she's sitting here next to me, so I'm assuming that she loves me so much. When it's your own pet and you're taking good care of them, it's very fun to anthropomorphize, I understand. But what actually happens if we get it wrong? Well, number one, it can lead to a lot of problems between human and animals. So human-animal interactions, if we are not fully understanding what the dog may be feeling, it can lead to harm for not only ourselves, but also the animals itself. It can also lead to putting animals in poor welfare situations. If we assume the dog is feeling great because it has a toy or something, we might be missing other signs. Or if we assume the dog is feeling great because ourself just saw a really sad dog before, so we see a new dog and it looks pretty okay. Again, we could be missing out on signs and putting animals in poor welfare conditions. And finally, again, I think our own pet dogs, if we anthropomorphize every once in a while, if we read the context wrong every once in a while, it's okay. But if we're missing, again, big things that our dogs are trying to tell us, it can really put them in harm and in distress as well. And I also think dogs are such a great ambassador species to learning animal emotions. Everyone loves dogs, everyone has dogs, everyone wants to know about dogs. And by starting with the dog as an emotional ambassador to learn more about animal emotions in general, we can really increase the welfare of all animals in human care, which is something I'm very excited about. So key takeaways here, individual differences. So learn your own dog, learn your own cat, learn your own animal, basically. I like to tell people, a lot of people say, okay, am I reading just the vacuum here? How do I understand what else to read about the dog? Kind of become your own little animal behaviorist at home. Next time you take out the vacuum, start taking out a notepad also and really saying, oh, my dog's ears go back. Oh, my dog's tail actually starts wagging. That's interesting. I didn't realize that. And start taking notes. What happens when you take out the treat? What does your dog do? You can kind of start taking notes and coming up with your animal's own behavior guide for yourself. Instead of just assuming vacuum equals bad, treat equals good. On that line, develop a bottom-up approach mindset. So instead of assuming dogs have the same emotions that humans do, happiness, sadness, fear, kind of think, what would a dog emotion look like in this situation? Why would a dog have evolved a certain emotion in this situation? So for example, we know that dogs love humans and they will do a lot for us humans. We as humans don't really have this type of subservient affection towards other higher beings, right? It's kind of hard for us to comprehend, but dogs seem to have something like that. So start to think, why would a dog have an emotion like this? How have they evolved? Why would they have evolved certain emotions? And again, kind of stay away from top down. Oh, this dog is happy. This dog is sad. Let me try and find key indicators of that and kind of just start from scratch. It's also important to recognize our anthropomorphic biases. Again, just don't assume that you know, even if it feels right. And I know you see a dog that's smiling and wagging a tail, it feels so right to say that dog is happy. But once you just start to understand that you have these biases and you have this anthropomorphism running through your brain, it really helps you to kind of take a step back and be like, oh, what else is going on? What's the situation around? How am I feeling? Am I impacting this? And just recognizing the bias is kind of the first step to really understanding our dogs. And then finally, remembering context and mood. Again, once you kind of have these blinders taken off and you now know that your mood's going to impact perception, you know that context is going to impact perception, you can start to look for actually the dog's behavioral indicators and cues. And hopefully then with your own dog, develop a much closer connection between the two of you. So with that, I thank you so much. Especially thanks to my dad and Oliver for being great actors. This is the paper that I was mostly talking about. If you're interested in, the mood paper is under review, so hopefully will coming out in the next couple months. If you have any questions about that, you can always email me. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Holly. That was really, really great.
Thank you.
Got a couple of questions for you. Did you
Yeah.
include children in your study around the situational context?
That's a good question. We did not. We had a great population of undergraduate students at Arizona State University. So the age range was like mostly 18 to 20-year-olds and then some above 22 plus. And so it'd be really interesting for someone to redo this study with different age groups, because we do know that children in a lot of studies are not as good at reading dog emotions as adults.
And if you could give just one piece of advice to a dog owner about understanding their dog, what would that be?
Yeah. My one piece of advice would be to, it sounds kind of dramatic, but forget everything you think you know about dog emotions and start to figure out your dog's own emotional cues. So despite people sending you those funny Instagram or TikTok videos of your dog does this, it means this, really pay attention to your own dog's cues. And you can even start with presenting them with positive or negative things. So not happy, sadness, just what does my dog do when I present with a treat? What does my dog do when I present them with a vacuum? I always use vacuum as an example.
Yes.
And again, just start to write down and try to find ways to actually learn your dog's behaviors rather than just assuming.
Fantastic. I'm sure you'll help lots of people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Holly Molinaro, for presenting her knowledge on dog emotions and human perceptions. Gosia, do you notice any similarities between what Holly has described here tonight and how we read emotions in other species?
Oh, heaps actually. I actually really liked how Holly. I think the general theme. I really liked how she encouraged us to be thinking about all animals' emotional states, sort of based on the physical response to a situation that they're in, rather than bringing our own perception about being happy or sad. Her dog wagging left or right tail example. I really like that one. Because there's a lot of work in other species that kind of have aligned with that. So for instance, chickens will look with their left eye when they're looking at something that's novel or scary. And then they'll tend to look with their right eye if they're looking at something like the regular food, something routine. And there's other examples of this with fish and with horses and with cows. Ear posture as well can tell us quite a bit. The thing that I had quite a bit of a chuckle on is her point about people having this tendency of focusing on the face, because a lot of the research that we have, so the examples I just gave you, a lot of the research actually focuses on the ears and the eyes. So we're even doing it in our own research. So yeah, I really I loved the way that she was, I think, overall rounded out her messaging with the fact that we need to just step back and not be thinking about the emotions as something that we're anticipating them to have in the way that we would feel it. And we can do that with all animals, cats, and I see some questions about cats. So I think, yeah, anyway, I'll leave it there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, thanks for that, Gosia. Yeah, super interesting, isn't it? All right, we'll get into our second one so we don't run out of time. So our second presentation tonight is by Dr. Gabriel Lencioni and focuses on horse emotions. So please enjoy, and I will just share my screen again. Okay, welcome, Dr. Gabriel. We're so pleased to have you with us tonight. Gabriel Lencioni is a veterinarian and a PhD candidate in equine behaviour and welfare at the University of Sao Paulo in Brazil. And Gabriel is investigating how artificial intelligence can help identify reliable indicators of affective states in horses. So today, Gabriel will be sharing practical science-backed strategies for recognising how horses express their emotions and why tuning into these cues can transform the way we interact with them. Thanks so much for being here, Gabriel.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Nicola. And it's a topic that I'm passionate about, so it's always great to talk about those subjects. And well, I'll try to share some slides here just to make things a little bit easier to explain, but I'll try to do it as briefly as possible so it won't take that much of a time, since when we're talking about topics that we like, it can take forever. But yeah. So are the slides appearing correctly?
Yes. Yeah, looking good.
Okay. So as Nicola mentioned, I have been working on recognizing equine emotions using artificial intelligence and computer vision methods to help us with this process. And I'll explain a little bit of that journey. So basically, I graduated as a vet, and I've always been interested in animal behavior and welfare right from the beginning of my graduation. And that's why I basically went through this path on starting with scientific projects with Professor Adroaldo Zanella, and I got certified with Fear Free and a certified equine behavior consultant with the IABC. And basically, even when I started this path on research, we started with this idea of associating the artificial intelligence methods that people didn't talk a lot at the time with our behavioral knowledge and all of that, so we could benefit horses. So that's basically where I started, and this was the first study that we published on automating basically the grimace scales for horses. So I believe people know already that we have pain scales to assess the levels of pain in lots of animal species, including horses. And we tried to automate this process so we wouldn't have people having to look at the horses 24/7 and being trained to apply that scale. So it was a really interesting start for this kind of approach. And we reached very good accuracy levels for that. So 75.8% of accuracy when assessing between absent pain, moderate pain, and present pain. And 88.3% of accuracy when just saying if the horse is or is not in pain. So that's quite useful. And those kinds of technology have been evolving more and more and helping us in this process of better understanding emotions, basically. So this is something that started to be discussed after that. And I could also participate on this study where we started seeing where the computational methods basically were doing in terms of recognizing not only pain, but also emotions in animals. And we have seen recently in the equine studies, especially more and more studies trying to discover more information about emotions and how we can assess this in the most objective way possible. And this is a really big challenge in all species. So I just cited here some of these papers so you can have an idea that this is a topic that is improving more and more each day. So basically, when we're talking about emotions, one concept that we use a lot is the core affect space. So basically, we classify the emotions in the level of valence and the level of arousal that the animals could be feeling. So if they have a more positive experience, for example, or more negative, and how energetic that emotion that they could be feeling is. And of course, this is not as easy in real life. So this is something that really takes good experience and good training in order to be able to assess where our animals are in this spectrum and in each situation that they are. So basically, this is something that helps us classify, and it has been used more and more now in recent research to help us through this path of assessing of affective states and emotions in animals. So just to give an example of how I'm applying this in my PhD studies, we are using the computational methods to look at the horse's body language behaviors. And we are also using the knowledge of experts in equine behavior to help us understand which behaviors are happening and if they are positive, negative, or neutral in terms of affective state. So what those horses could be feeling, having in mind what we already have in the literature, and hopefully the AI might be also able to help us identify things that we can't see or we still don't know. So those are some interesting things. So for example, these are 2 frames from a video that was assessed by most of the people as negative. And here you can see the video happening. So those are some behaviors, for example, that we could be looking as tail swishing, the head upwards and downwards, and some movements that could be taken into considerations. And many times we don't pay much attention to them in real practice and in equine competitions as well. So this is something that we are really interested in looking in the real life and real situations of equine sports, for example. So also trying to assess affective states in ridden horses. And this could make things even a little bit more challenging because understanding affective states from horses generally, like even without the human, is already a challenge, as I was mentioning. But the human brings another step to this challenge. So it's quite interesting to look at that. And also, just to give another example here of a positive video that was assessed by the experts mostly as positive. And we can see a more relaxed horse with the head more relaxed, his tail is not swishing as the other one, and a more harmonious movement, basically. So that's something that we are investigating now to try to bring our assessment to be the most objective as we can, basically. So as I mentioned, overall, those things are still a big challenge for us to assess, since we have lots of indicators in the horse body language and facial expressions as well. As I mentioned, some are used for pain assessment. We have tools such as the Equifax, for example, that look at every muscle and tiny change in the horse's face, and many studies are using those types of indicators right now in many species to try and bring more information about what's happening. And we also have the difficulty that it is that we must take the context into consideration as well, because sometimes the same behavior in different situations could lead us to different conclusions. So that's really important. And I had to add to my slides this other study that was pretty recent, and it was published this year. And they also tried to do that. So basically put the horses through a situation where they would anticipate something positive happening, and another situation that they would anticipate something negative happening. And they looked at those behaviors that they're expressing here, such as like the chin raiser muscle, the lip, and how the nostrils and the ears, the tongue, and the frequency of blinking and all of that would change in those situations. So it's really interesting that even though we have lots of knowledge that regarding those things in equine training and all of that, we still don't know, like many of those things are just said by experience or what people believe. But we have now more and more studies coming out in this sense of trying to really gather more evidence for us to better understand those behaviors that are happening. So those are quite useful for us to have a better relationship and interpret better horses. And so just to mention some of the resources that we have out there, we have, for example, the ridden horse painetogram by Dr. Sue Dyson that looks at 24 behaviors on the ridden horse that could be associated to pain. And we have some resources that are free from the Fear Free, for example, that allow us to better understand, especially during handling and veterinary care, some signals that could indicate that the horses are getting to a higher level of fear, anxiety, and stress. And also this other template that shows some signs of fear, anxiety, and stress in the horses that are many, many times misinterpreted. So as we can see, for example, here, the licking and chewing, I think it's the biggest one in the equine world that people usually misunderstand and think that is they're showing this behavior because there's learning happening and things like that. While on the other hand, research has been showing that it's probably more associated with this change in the sympathetic response from the horses. So it's quite interesting for us to try and look for more evidence to back up everything that we are doing with horses in training and in all our interactions with them, especially if we're talking about sports and social license to operate and aiming that we want to have horses as happy as possible in their interactions with us. So it's quite useful to get to know it, those behaviors that we can also discuss them in more details. So just to mention here and to thank everyone involved in my project. And here's my Instagram as well, if someone is interested in knowing more about it. And I'm really happy to talk more about all of those topics that I just wanted to approach here. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Gabriel. That was really great. What sort of equipment did you use to use the AI to assess the negative states? Like, did you have lots of cameras involved, or yeah?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And we discussed this for a lot. And basically, in the ideal world, it would be the best thing for us to have cameras in all sides of the arena and perfect lighting and all of that. So it would make our lives and the learning of the computer vision system also easier, way easier. But what we wanted, actually, we were thinking like, well, we want this technology to be able to work in a real life setting. So what would happen if we used real life competition videos to train this AI? So that's basically what we're doing. We got footage from a dressage competition that had already happened. So we didn't organize where the camera would be, how would be the lighting and all of that. And therefore, it probably it is making things way more difficult for the AI to learn. But we wanted to test exactly that, how well it would be in those real life situations and with less gadgets, let's say. So it's quite interesting. And also in terms of the view of the horses. So let's say, for example, if we have the horse on the lateral view, is the easiest one for us and for the camera to assess. But in a competition, you will see sometimes the horse from his hind or from the front, and we are trying to test and see how well the AI will adapt to that as well.
Fantastic. Wow. Yeah. Okay, I'll just ask you to stop sharing the screen.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Great. And what's next for you? What's next year's research?
So, well, so basically we right now are still training the computer vision system, and we want to basically be able to correlate those things that we find out from the AI with what we are seeing as humans. So basically, the AI is way better than we are at identifying those patterns and angles and all of that. And I believe that this way we could be able to have, for example, a technology that would be able to help us benefit equine sports and improve even training or competition, so that we could have an objective tool that wouldn't lead to more problems, but actually help us to kind of select horses that are happier interacting with us. So it's basically that's what would be our final aim and ideal, but also identifying those behaviors. Since we have that many discussions on what each behavior means, then hopefully the AI will be able to help us better understand what we are seeing. Because basically, if I show the same competition video to 10 different people, some of them might not have the same opinion about it. So with the AI, we hopefully will be able to understand better what each person is seeing and which behaviors are really important for us to pay attention.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Oh, it's so exciting to see that work happening, and how technology can be used in ways so we can better understand horses. You know, it's a great way to use technology. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and yeah, I wish you all the best with the future research.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was awesome.
All right. Thank you to Dr. Gabriel Lencioni for sharing his research insights on horse emotions. Now, just at the start of this interview, Gabriel mentioned the Grimace scale and his work on computational assessment of pain in horses. So I'd just like to briefly explain the Grimace scale for some of the viewers who may not be very familiar with it. The Grimace scale is a tool used to assess pain in animals by observing subtle changes in their facial expressions, such as tightened eyes or shifts in ear or nose position or whisker changes. And you assess key facial features called facial action units, which are scored. So typically a score would be 0 for not present, 1 for moderate, and 2 for obvious, and then summed up to produce an overall pain score, typically out of a max of 10. So this approach helps detect pain that might not be obvious from just the animal's general behavior alone. Gosia, can you tell us more about how the Grimace scale is used in other species?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's actually quite several Grimace scales. The basically the very first one that was created, it's almost 20 years ago now, was for mice, and fairly quickly after that followed other rodents or laboratory animals, so rats and rabbits. And then more recently, as Gabrielle was talking about, there's horses and some effort has also been in sheep and in goats as well. And as you were mentioning, basically they focus on your main things, the ears, the nose, the muzzle, and general facial tension. And it's interesting, I guess the interesting point is that they all of them are intended to really focus on the main thing, which is to help us standardize how we're interpreting a painful situation. And if you bring all that back, you can think about why it was invented. When I sort of said it started with mice, is because these animals are often the ones that are in laboratory settings, and they unfortunately have to sometimes endure painful stimuli. And it's really important when when researchers do these types of studies that we are able to do things ethically. And so we have to be able to standardize how we're interpreting what's happening to the animals. And that's actually where it came from. And so this is a really good way to do it, rather than just asking technicians to say, oh yes, we're checking them, the animals aren't in pain, for example. This way is actually a way to standardize it, so how you've described it. But again, now it's being used across the board, and not like Gabrielle was saying, in a dressage situation. So it doesn't have to just be in laboratory settings.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for that, Gosia. Yeah, definitely trying to do better.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right, that brings us to our third and final presentation tonight, which is on cat emotions. And it's likely to be a favorite for some of you, because we know from our own research that 40% of New Zealand households share their home with at least one cat. So this interview features Dr. Britt Florkiewicz. She's a comparative and evolutionary psychologist at Lyon College in the US. So enjoy this final presentation. I'll just share my screen again. All right, welcome, Dr. Britt. Wonderful to have you here today. Britt,
thanks for having
me. Yeah. Britt is a comparative and evolutionary psychologist and assistant professor of psychology at Lyon College in Arkansas. And Britt's research explores the fascinating world of animal facial signals. Her work sheds light on how these expressions relate to the evolution of social behavior and gestural communication. Alongside this, she applies her expertise to human-animal interactions, developing practical training tools for zookeepers, veterinarians, pet owners, and animal caregivers. And today she'll be sharing insights from her groundbreaking research into feline facial expressions and helping us better understand how to read cats' emotions without the filter of human assumptions. So yeah, thanks for being here, Dr. Britt.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to talk a little bit today about cat facial expressions. So before I begin showing a bunch of images of cats, because that is a necessity when we're talking about faces and emotions and animals, I think it's really good to start with just a brief introduction to animal facial expressions, right? So cats, like lots of other animals, including humans, they're capable of producing a wide range of facial muscle movements that they combine together to create various kinds of signals. For example, cats can move their ears, their whiskers, their eyes, their nose, and their mouth in various ways to be able to socially interact with humans, but also other cats and animals. So one of the reasons why mammals are capable of producing so many different kinds of facial expressions, which includes cats, is to be able to communicate information about internal and external states. And this is beneficial to humans and other cats and animals because it allows us to predict their behavior, right? So we can have a pretty good understanding, based on personal experiences and our own expertise and knowledge about what a cat may be feeling. But just like with humans, emotions are a very individualized, personalized experience. So oftentimes when it comes to us doing research on cat facial expressions, we're very much focused on, after this particular combination of facial muscle movements is produced, what happens? What does the cat do? And how do other cats and humans respond to this? So how likely is play going to happen given a particular configuration, maybe with ears forward versus ears backwards? This approach of focusing on prediction is actually very nice because it allows us to ascribe meaning based on the probability in which event A, a particular facial muscle movement or combination occurs, leads to part B. And then we can make, some kinds of references about, well, maybe the cat is feeling playful because this is happening, right? And they're engaging in play behavior. So we can also potentially tie mood and emotion to that. So what I'd like to do today is kind of talk about the muscle movement capabilities of cats and talk about some of the ways in which they combine these different facial muscle movements to interact not just with humans, but other cats whenever they're given a situation where they can interact freely with one another. So now, without further ado, in order to kind of illustrate these points, I have lots of very fun illustrations and photos of cats to potentially do. So the first image that we have here is a series of depictions of different types of facial expressions that cats produce towards humans. Now, originally, this kind of work was done by Leyhausen in 1979. He was interested in the different defensive and offensive states of cats. So when cats are feeling personally defensive, when humans are approaching them, what kinds of facial muscle movements do they produce? And when they're feeling offensive, they're about to attack, what do those facial muscle movement combinations look like? So you can kind of see on the left-hand side, you have a graded effect here where you have, slightly defensive on the top left-hand side to very defensive on the bottom left-hand side. On the right-hand side, for comparison, you have slightly offensive to very offensive. So he argued that, depending on what kinds of facial muscle movements you see, you can predict whether or not the cat is going to flee or fight you in these types of situations. Now, his research was largely based on, how, for example, cats produce these kinds of facial muscle movement combinations towards humans. So with my research, what we're looking at is to see whether or not these are similar in terms of when cats are feeling defensive and offensive towards one another as what we see with humans. So if you actually think about this, I know this illustration is a little bit basic here, but if you kind of envision to yourself, what does a cat look like when they're feeling potentially scared and they might flee away, but they're trying to give you a warning that, hey, back off or I'm going to run? Usually looks something like this, right? You see that the ears in this case are pinned backwards. You see that the pupils are dilated and the mouth is wide open, showing both sets of teeth. And sometimes you get a hiss that accompanies this, right? So the cats are flattening their ears to protect them, right? They're very vulnerable, very sensitive. So flattening them against the head means that there's less probability of damage happening. They're dilating their pupils because they want to let more light in. They want to see more of their environment. They want to see the threats that are potentially happening here. And you see that they have their mouth wide open just in case they might need to bite or they might need to potentially flee and run away in this case. So this is a classic whenever you're envisioning what does it look like in my head when a cat is feeling kind of defensive, scared, and as a result is producing a facial expression and might run away. This is what it kind of looks like, right? So the question is, all right, we have a lot of great research on how cats produce facial expressions towards humans, but what about other cats? Because in New Zealand and other parts of the world, the number of cats per household is increasing. Here in the United States, it's about 2 cats per household. So what about when cats are interacting with each other freely? Whenever they're feeling defensive or offensive, is it going to look kind of the same as what we see with Leyhausen's original 1979 publication, as illustrated here by Bennett? So The answer is that there are similarities, but very important differences. And it's really crucial to be able to identify these differences, to be able to, provide assistance, to maybe provide aid to cats, and maybe intervene when an interaction might turn south. So this is one of the illustrations that I've done based on some of the findings of my work with cat-cat interactions. Now, you'll see there's 3 cat faces. On the left-hand side, this is a neutral face for comparison. Now, take a look at the image on the right-hand side labeled C. What we have found in our studies is that this type of facial muscle movement combination is often produced by cats when they're not feeling so friendly towards one another. Now, notice how, just like with Lehausen and just like with human interactions, the ears are pinned backwards here. But notice here in this case, kind of like with the offensive facial expressions they produce whenever they're interacting with humans, the pupils here are constricted. They're trying to protect their eyes, protect their vision. And notice how here, instead of showing rows of teeth, they're actually licking their lips. You can see this happening if you have 2 or more cats at home. Whenever they're about to get into a fight, you'll see that they usually make a very low growling sound. Their ears are backwards, their pupils are constricted, and they'll keep just like licking their lips over and over, and they'll have a very interesting stiff, rigid posture. And that's because they're expecting something like this to happen. So see here the tortoiseshell cat on the left-hand side, ears are backwards, pupils are constricted, and then in the video clip, this cat is licking his lips and anticipating a potential fight, right? So by licking the lips, you're kind of preparing for that biting behavior and preparing to have your mouth open for a long period of time, but they're still protecting the ears, and they're also protecting the eyes because claws are sharp. They can potentially do quite a bit of damage. Excuse me. So we notice here that, all right, like with what we see with cat-human interactions, there's some similarities here based on that bottom left-hand image, bottom right-hand image, but notice there's some differences as well based on the fact that these cats are interacting with other cats. Now, to kind of end things on a little bit of a positive note, let's talk about more friendly expressions, right? So when you ask people, what is a telltale sign that a cat is very friendly, is feeling very positive and pro-social, wants to interact with humans? The answer is slow blinking. So you can kind of see this on the bottom right-hand side. Slow blinking is one of those signs that a lot of pet owners know that means that their cat is feeling very friendly. So in the 2020 study by researchers, what we found is that when humans produce that slow blink towards their cats are significantly more likely to approach them for a positive interaction. So cats understand that this is a very positive sign with humans, and they're feeling usually more positive, and they engage in more pro-social behaviors when they themselves produce that slow blink behavior. So we know this is a pretty common, widespread function of the slow blink. Notice here, though, they're not closing their eyes. It's very close, but they're still keeping their eyes open to be able to see and interact with you. Notice how in this photo, there's not much happening in terms of whisker movement. The ears are remaining in a pretty neutral position. Now, based on our studies of cat-cat interactions, there's some similarities, but also key differences as well. So notice how on figure B, and kind of in the center of the PowerPoint slide, notice how the cat has their eyes closed typically whenever they're engaging in friendly interactions or anticipating friendly interactions with other cats. So this is a sign of trust, right? You're saying, I trust you to not do anything to me while my eyes are closed, while we're engaging in this affiliative behavior like grooming or resting together. Now, notice how also, in addition to having the eyes closed, the whiskers oftentimes go forward as if to touch the other cat, and the ears also go forward as if to touch the other cat as well. So this is encouraging body contact between these cats, encouraging them to interact with one another, to be able to do all of these very friendly behaviors. Now you can imagine there's an interesting contrast here because going back to this slide, friendly behaviors, right? If you look at your cat's facial expression while they're interacting with each other, and you see all of these movements in the middle where it seems like the ears and whiskers are going forward to touch the other cat, that's a positive sign. But if you see that the ears are going back, the eyes, the pupils are constricting, the whiskers and the mouth, right? And they're kind of backing up a little bit, you know, that's not going to be potentially a good interaction. And maybe you want to intervene, maybe you want to do some more digging to see what's going on there and what kind of relationship your cats have with each other. So we kind of see that similarities and differences exist when it comes to how cats produce these facial muscle movement combinations towards humans and towards other cats. Now, we believe that this is largely due to the fact that cats' social lives are actually pretty complex. They manage lots of different relationships with other cats, but also with humans. They understand that humans are different. We communicate very differently compared to cats. So as a result, through artificial selection and natural selection, cats have evolved a very rich facial expression repertoire to be able to navigate these numerous social interactions, both positive and negative. So we see that if you're looking at your cat and you're trying to figure out, is this going to be a good or bad situation, being able to be mindful of these different facial muscle movements is going to be a very key factor in this. One of the things I haven't talked about today is the fact that oftentimes a lot of these facial expressions are combined with vocalizations and positional behaviors as well. So, you know, when it comes to thinking about how your cat's interaction, it's also interacting with one another, it's also important to consider those behaviors as well.
What sort of methodology did you use to establish these different facial expressions?
Yes. So, to do the kind of research that we do on cat social interactions through facial expressions, we use two different methods. So, the first one is using something called facial action coding systems, or abbreviated as FACS. This is a manual coding scheme that trains users to be able to identify subtle and overt facial muscle movements based on anatomical illustrations and also video clips of animals interacting in real time. The original FACS was created to study human facial expressions by Paul Ekman in the 90s, but has since been revised and revamped to work with a wide variety of species, including cats. So this is a very rigorous training protocol that you actually have to be certified in order to use. And what you end up doing is with these video clips that you're taking of cat-cat interactions, you're looking at these different types of facial muscle movements of the ears, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, and you're coding whether or not they're present or absent and how they're being combined together based on a variety of variables that you can look at, like, for instance, social context, whether or not this is a positive or negative interaction. So that's the first method that we use. The more recent method we've been adopting is something called landmark detection. So to put it in perspective, if you have about an hour of video footage of cats interacting with one another, it can take anywhere from 2 to 4 hours to code all of the facial muscle movements that are being produced in that video clip. It's very time consuming. Now, the good news is that we now are developing automated approaches to be able to code these facial muscle movements and combinations. Landmark detection works as follows. You take your video and you take your training program and you're applying these different key landmarks onto the face of cats. So on the corners of the eyes, on the top and the bottom of the eyelids, the brow region, the ears, the nose, the cheeks, and mouth. And whenever there's a muscle movement in this region, it pings it as being present by the machine. So this is fantastic because you can have this kind of similar coding paradigm, but being done automatically. Now, the good news is that we have validated this. We have compared and contrast the FACS to the automated coding, and it works just as well, which is fantastic for saving time, but also for being able to answer a wide variety of research questions that are not typically possible, or it would take a lot of time to answer because of the fact that the FACS is so extensive. So for example, my colleagues and I have found out through landmark detection that cats, like humans, they can catch positive mood. They engage in something called rapid facial mimicry, where when they see a positive face, like the ones that I showed, where the ears are going forward, the eyes are closed, the whiskers are going forward, they're also very likely to produce that same exact expression in response because it allows individuals through the production of this same expression to connect physically and psychologically. I'm producing the same thing And I can better understand what others are thinking and feeling as a result, and be able to get a better understanding of how this other cat is going to respond, to be able to further predict their behavior. So those are the two different methods that we use when it comes to identifying the different facial muscle movement combinations that cats produce and what those potentially mean in terms of predicting behavior.
Fantastic. And how many facial expressions do cats have?
Yes. So in our most recent study in 2023, we found that cats are capable of producing 276 morphologically distinct facial expressions. Now, here's the thing to consider. We recently published a study in 2025 that showed that based on the anatomy and physiology of the cat face, based on the kinds of facial muscle movements they can produce, it is very likely that this is just a starting point, that if we were to expand our sample to include more cats and more video footage, it's very likely we'll actually see more than that 276. So additional research is needed to see whether or not this is the case, but also to see, are there similarities and differences in form and function across groups of cats? We looked at one group of cats in a cat cafe, but what about cats living on islands? What about cats living in shelters? What about cats living in your house, right? There's so much potential there based on the anatomy of the cat. But at the very least, we know right now that they have a very rich array of facial expressions that they rely on to navigate these interactions.
Wow, yes. I'm sure you'll be doing a lot more research on in this field, Britt. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's just more and more questions every time we learn something new about cats. We're like, oh, well, what about this? What about that? So I'm very excited to continue doing cat research in this regard.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, thank you so much for this presentation. It's probably gonna teach us all how to communicate with our cats better. So yeah, it's really, really good and really needed. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
There we go. That was Dr. Britt Florkiewicz. Thanks so much to Britt for sharing her insights on cat expressions. Gosia, you worked with Britt on a study looking at how humans interpret what cats might do next based on their expressions and body language. What surprised you most in your findings?
Oh, I think one of the neatest things that came out of that study was the analysis of what people just wrote. So they would predict, they'd watch the videos and then they would predict what would happen after. But we would also prompt them to just tell us what they thought, like in their own words. And one of the surprising things was there was almost there was a consistent use of the words fighting and chasing in both the positive and the negative interactions. However, the professionals, the people that worked with animals as part of their work in some way, shape, or form, they were actually much better at doing the predicting part of it when it was going to be aggressive. Likely, I mean, obviously we don't know, but this was likely because they've, over time in their work with animals, have learned to spot these subtle kind of cues that the rest of us, if we're just glancing and not very in tune to anything more than maybe our own cat or cats that we've had in the past, we might just miss it. And I think this suggests kind of an exciting thing, I guess, from a researcher's perspective, is that, we can help cat owners, teaching them how to recognize those kind of subtle cues that distinguish playful fighting from actual real aggression. And I don't think it's about changing the vocabulary that people use. People are going to use the vocabulary they're going to use, but I think it's just helping people see and be able to articulate those differences. So for me, that was kind of exciting because we like to do research that ultimately has a practical application. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's all about that, isn't it? Education and yeah. Great. All right. So we have gone to about 72 minutes. So thank you to all our speakers who featured tonight and who generously shared their time and expertise with us, Holly, Gabriel, Britt, and then of course Gosia, for joining us tonight to offer a researcher's perspective and answer some questions for us. And also thanks to everyone who's still here. These 3 presentations will be available on our YouTube channel within a few days, and we'll email you the link to the recording as well. Any questions you have, we can get them followed up by the experts who spoke tonight. So feel free to either email them through to us, welfare@companionanimals.nz, or we will release a web article at the end of this webinar series, so there might be something in there as well. If you'd like to support Companion Animals New Zealand and our webinars, please consider making a small donation. You can find the link on our website or in the follow-up email with the YouTube link. So thanks again and have a wonderful evening.